Zhuangzi's Fables and Their Wisdom, Module 1, Introduction. Lesson 2, The Man Named Zhuangzi. Interview 1, Zhuangzi's Life Story. Hello everyone, I'm Miss Zhou. This is the second lesson of this module, The Man Named Zhuangzi. In this lesson, I will introduce our hero Zhuangzi to you. His original name was Zhuangzi, with Zhuang being the family name and Zhou being the surname, as all Chinese names do. But in most of the translated works, he is known as Chongzu or Chongzi, due to the Wade-Giles romanization system used before 1979. Here, the second part of the name, Zhu, actually means master, as in the names Lozhu and Mozu, which is used to show respect. Now we know something about his name, but we need to explore further about the life stories of Zhuangzi, the time he lived in, and the importance of his philosophy in both China and the West. These are some of the basic questions we will investigate in this lesson. Who is Zhuangzi? I think Sima Qian, the historian who lived some 2,000 years ago in the early Han Dynasty, and the author of The Records of the Grand Historian, or in Chinese, Shi Ji, says it best. Let's invite Mr. Sima to give us an introduction of Zhuangzi.
Hello, I'm Sima Qian. I'm very glad to be invited here to talk about Zhuangzi. Actually, the life of Zhuangzi is little known even to historians in China. Most of the knowledge about Zhuangzi comes from his own texts and some anecdotes. As far as I know, Zhuangzi was born in the town of Meng in the state of Song in modern Anhui province. If we look at this map, this is where Zhuangzi is believed to have been born. He used to be a minor official in charge of lacquer business in his hometown, but he soon got tired of it and quit his job. When he was exactly born remains a mystery, but we do know from his own texts that he was a contemporary of King Hui of Liang and King Xuan of Qi. Both lived in the 4th century BC. Zhuangzi made himself well acquainted with all the literature of his time, but he called himself a follower of Lao Tzu. Later, when Wei of Chu heard about Zhuangzi, he tried to invite him to one of his distinguished nobles, as reflected in the story of Yue, the goat butcher.
Yes, Yue, the goat butcher, was also offered a job as a distinguished noble by King Zhao of Chu.
Most of us might think that this position was good enough for Zhuangzi, but he refused by telling a fable of a sacrificial ox and said that he would rather drag his tail in the mud like a free tortoise than be restricted in the court of a sovereign. So, this is Zhuangzi.
That is a very interesting comparison. Thank you very much, Mr. Sima. Interview 2, The Time Zhuangzi Lived. Just now, Mr. Sima Qian gave us some information about Zhuangzi's life story. But to understand what kind of book Zhuangzi is and why our hero wrote it this way, it is necessary to investigate further the time Zhuangzi lived in. Today, I invited another scholar, Mr. Ma Shulun, to be our guest. Mr. Ma, or rather Professor Ma, is a linguist professor at Peking University, and he worked as Minister of Education in China from 1949 to 1952. Hi, Professor Ma. I know you have written several books about Zhuangzi, and today you've got some really interesting viewpoints to share with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Miss Zhou. Yes, personally, I am a fan of Zhuangzi. That's why I gladly accepted the task of teaching a course about Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi at Peking University back in 1917. My teaching materials and research findings were first published as Zhuangzi Zha Ji and later republished as Zhuangzi Yi Zheng. In 1958, my third book about Zhuangzi was published. I do agree with you that better background knowledge of the time Zhuangzi lived can help us better understand the man and his masterpiece. So, I attached the chronology of Zhuangzi to the latter two books, which was made by referring to many ancient books about the history of the Warring State period. I hope the chronology will help my readers.
I'm sure it will. Another point I've noticed is that the book Zhuangzi is written mainly in three forms. That is, expression of inexpressible, true words, saying of eminent figures and fables. The images he used were all-inclusive. For instance, the dialogues can be anything from famous scholars to plants, and animals to waters and mountains. Do you think this has something to do with the time he lived in?
Sure, although we don't exactly know when Zhuangzi was born, but by reading the text of Zhuangzi, records of the grand historian of China, Shuo Wen, Jiezi, and other existing ancient texts, we can roughly conclude that he was a citizen of Song, living mostly under the reign of King Yan, also known as King Kang. According to the text of Zhuangzi, King Kang of Song was cruel to his people. According to strategies of the warring states, King Kang was a cruel and warlike king who destroyed the state of Tang, attacked Shui, and seized the land north of the Huaishi River. To show his power, he shot the god of the heaven and whipped the god of the earth. He scolded those old court officials who dared to remonstrate with him, sliced off the backs of those hunchbacks, and cut off the feet of those who crossed the river early in the morning. People all over the state were terrified. So, living under the reign of such a king, Zhuangzi could not express his philosophy directly. Instead, he used fables, dialogues, and seemingly irrelevant comments, and in his fables, you can read stories of the hunchbacks or disabled. Zhuangzi also traveled to a lot of places and met different people. That's why he used all sorts of things as images in his text.
But we know Zhuangzi is really different from other philosophers of his time. As a Taoist, he had no interest in fame, wealth, or power. Instead, he sought freedom and non-interference.
Definitely. We are all affected by the time we live in. As we all know, the time Zhuangzi lived in is known as the Warring States period in China, when war resulted in widespread death, poverty, and destruction. On the other hand, the bloody wars propelled the intellectuals to develop different views on the world and reassess the relationship between men or between men and nature. Thus, we have another name for this period, 100 schools of thought, or in Chinese pinyin, 注记 by Jia, which refers to the proliferation of thoughts and the development of ideas such as Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and Moism. However, Zhuangzi is different with other philosophers at his time, in that he had neither faith in politics nor interest in fame, wealth, or power. Compared with serving the cruel King Kang, Zhuangzi would rather be a free turtle in the mud.
Thank you, Mr. Ma. What you've brought to us today is really enlightening. Interview 3. The Importance of Zhuangzi. How important is Zhuangzi in his text in both Chinese and Western philosophy and literature? We will invite 2 translators from China and Britain respectively to share with us what they think of Zhuangzi. The first translator is Lin Yutong, a renowned contemporary Chinese writer, translator, linguist, and philosopher.
Thank you for inviting me. As we all know, Jesus was followed by St. Paul, Socrates by Plato, Confucius by Mencius, and Lao Tzu by Zhuangzi. In all 4 cases, the first was the real teacher, and either wrote no books or wrote very little. And the second began to develop the doctrines and wrote long and profound discourses. Zhuangzi is therefore important as the first one who fully developed the Taoist thesis of the rhythm of life, contained in the epigrams of Lao Tzu. Taoism is not a school of thought in China. It is a deep, fundamental trait of Chinese thinking and of the Chinese attitude toward life and toward society.
Thank you, Mr. Lin. That clearly explained the position of Zhuangzi and his philosophy, both at home and abroad. Next, let's invite Mr. Burton Watson. Mr. Watson is an American scholar, sinologist. He is best known as a renowned translator of Chinese and Japanese classics and has received a number of esteemed awards for his work, including the Gold Medal Award from the Translation Center at Columbia University in 1979, the Penn Translation Prize in 1982, and again in 1995, and the Penn Ralph Mannheim Medal for translation in 2015. His translation of Zhuangzi is still deemed as the best translated version by many scholars and readers.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. My first direct experience with East Asia started in 1945. I was in the Navy, and our ship anchored at the Yokosuka Naval Base. When I was discharged from the Navy, I decided to study Chinese at Columbia University on the GI Bill, and thus I started my career as a translator. I have a special interest in Chinese and Japanese literature. When it comes to Zhuangzi, if you have read the book Shiji, in other words, Records of the Historian, you will know something about him. By reading his text, we can easily conclude that he is a literary genius, using paradoxical anecdotes, pseudo-logical discussions, and a humorous tone to fight against all that is pompous, staid, and holy. His writings certainly bear the stamp of a brilliant and original mind. His thought stands for one important branch of the Taoist school, which is radically different from the other philosophers of his time. He addresses the spiritual elite, not the political or intellectual elite. That means his work has seldom been fully understood and embraced in its pure form by more than a small minority. Many scholars believe that Zhuangzi is a disciple of Lao Tzu, but in my opinion, there isn't any documentation to support this view. I'd rather treat them as the two most important sages of Taoism.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. When I heard these comments, I was greatly moved. We all know that Zhuangzi is one of the most important Taoist sage in China, but only those who have read Zhuangzi in depth will give such comments. Today, we choose to present Zhuangzi to our learners not only because he is a great thinker, philosopher, but also because he is one of the greatest literary geniuses in Chinese history. We will introduce his texts, writing styles, and ambitions in the following lessons.